Hello, everybody, and welcome to my review of 1993's Steven Spielberg's We're Back. One Piece chapter 998, only 2 chapters away from the big 1K. This week we start off the cover page with a fan favorite villain that we haven't seen in a while, NL, and he's dozing off on a cat. And apparently the cat is full. Now apparently chapters 999 and chapter 1000 will actually have a color spread each, and that color spread combines to form the biggest One Piece color spread in history. And the chapter starts off with Onigashima floating and Chopper being on fire. Now, apparently, Chopper getting lit on fire wasn't something that Zoro and Brook appreciated very much, so if I'm reading the panel right, it seems as if both Brook and Zoro swing at Marco, because it's like, how dare you? How dare you light our little brother / doctor of the crew on fire? And then Marco's like, relax, relax. It's not that big of a deal. It's not really hot flame. Think about it as ointment. So Chopper gets the treatment. You can tell immediately that the infection starts to recede. And just look at his mouth, right? Like, he used to have an oni fang, just like a sharp oni fang on his mouth. And that's gone. Dr. Miyagi and Tristan show up to remind me of their existence, because I haven't thought about the squirrel nurse or goat doctor ever since Zoe. Like, even Oda gives you a reminder of what their names are. It's Dr. Miyagi and Tristan, in case you forgot, because there's so many freaking characters in this arc already. Regardless, though, because we haven't seen these characters in a while, I am kind of curious as to how they got onto the island. Like, did they get a ride on Sunisha? Is that what happened? They must have gotten onto the island before it started rising up into the sky, right? So I wonder if this kind of means that Sunisha is nearby.
Now, I really liked the official translation's name for Marco's fiery wave that covers the frozen Oni. It's called Phoenix Pyre Apple. And the reason why that's such a great name, such a great pun, is because if you remember back in Zoe, Luffy couldn't remember who Marco was, and Robin had to tell him it's the guy who looks like a pineapple. So we get Marco's pineapple attack, or pyre apple attack, being used to heal the frozen Oni. Now, he only cures them temporarily, because he says that as soon as their body temperature drops, or as soon as their stamina drops, they'll go back to the way they were. And I feel like that's the case because if Marco's flames were enough to completely remove the infection, then Chopper really wouldn't have anything to do. And so Oda wants to find something for Chopper to do. I do think that at one point, the people that were infected will be reverting back to being Oni, and then Chopper will come in with the antidote because he has to mass produce it and distribute it. Very similar, in fact, to a certain situation that we're living in right now. So that'll be Chopper's heroic moment of the arc. Because as of right now, like, I'm not really sure who he would fight if he is gonna fight. It's also interesting how Queen seems to recognize Marco. He's like, Marco, what is he doing here? So I wonder if there's some history there. And I feel like Oda having Marco use his powers to help all those people is gonna turn out to be a nerf for Marco. Like, at one point, there's gonna be something that Marco has to do, or somebody who he has to fight, and Marco is gonna have a scene where he says, oh, if only I hadn't cured all those people, I would be game for this. But because I cured all those people, I'm not at full. I used up a lot of my flames back there, but also clashing against Big Mom. And so Marco won't be able to do X, and whatever X is will be relegated to one of the Straw Hats. And at first, carrying 3 people up all at once may seem like a lot, but you have to remember that Marco already carried Nekomamushi from his ship over to the back entrance of Onigashima. So if he could do that, if he could carry Nekomamushi, as big as he is, right, then that means that, Zoro, Robin, and Brook will be no problem for him. Especially because Brook doesn't weigh anything. Now, personally, I don't see Brook or Robin reaching the rooftop because there's not much they can do up there with Kaido and Big Mom. Well, Brook already fought Big Mom, but at the end of the day, as far as we know, neither Brook or Robin have armament hockey, so there's not a whole lot they'll be able to do up there. So I think that they will be left behind. I think Robin versus Black Maria just became a little bit more likely after this chapter, just because of Robin's ability that allows her to sprout limbs, several limbs, kind of like a spider. So yeah, I really want to see that fight. I wanted Brook to fight Apu, and Oda kind of teased it a little bit in this chapter where Apu just comes out of nowhere and then you see Brook unsheath his blade. But then Drake comes in full Zoan, like the T-Rex at the end of Jurassic Park. You know what scene I'm talking about, right? The scene where it seems like Dr. Grant, Sadler, and the kids are trapped, right, by the velociraptors, and then the T-Rex comes out of nowhere, grabs one of the velociraptors, and just flings it away. That's what this scene reminded me of. Except Apu is the velociraptor and Drake is the T-Rex, even though Drake is technically an Allosaurus. So it seems like Drake and the Yakuza bosses will be in charge of taking care of that floor while Chopper works on curing people. And I could totally see a scene where Law comes up the stairs and he's like, "What happened here, Drake?" And then Drake's like, "They went upstairs. You want to ride?" Shambles, and they'll just switch up. Now, we still don't know what Hawkins is up to, and there are still some numbers that need to be revealed as well. And speaking of Supernova, man, Apu's durability is insane. I mean, I know the scene is meant to make Drake look cool, but man, Apu has been flexing that durability hard. He took an attack from Kid, he took one from Zoro. I'm pretty sure he's gonna be back, even after what Drake did to him. Because again, he has to be back so that he can change sides. So, that durability is super impressive. No wonder why he's one of the Supernova feats. Supernova feats.
We then cut to General Franky, and I have to say that I think what we're seeing in that page is actually an upgrade to General Franky's weapon system. And I'm saying this because I don't think we've ever seen Franky's rockets come out of General Franky's shoulders. I mean, we have seen human form Franky launch rockets out of his own shoulders, but not General Franky, so I think maybe this is an upgrade. Anyway, he's blasting up the shields of the armored squad, and then Sasaki's like, "Move back, you fools! I'll handle this."
Wham! He sends Franky flipping backwards and reveals what his devil fruit power is. And I have to say, out of all of the prehistoric devil fruits that we've seen in this arc thus far, with the exception of King, this is my favorite design. This Triceratops looks boss. It reminds me of my childhood growing up with The Land Before Time. Sarah's dad, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I think his name was like Daddy Tops or something. So Daddy Tops is there up against Franky. And I think for the most part, the fandom kind of knew that his devil fruit had to be something armored because Sasaki was in charge of the armored squad, right? Initially, I made my prediction that I thought like he would have to be either a Stegosaurus, an Ankylosaurus, or a Triceratops. But, the closer we got to this reveal, I did say that I was suspecting more and more that he was a Triceratops. Maybe if I can decipher that logo, that drawing, maybe that'll give us a hint as to what Sasaki's devil fruit power is. I mean, it kind of looks like the standard Onigashima logo with like the skull and the horns, but it also kind of looks a little bit like the front of a Triceratops. I can already imagine two-legged hybrid Sasaki wielding that blade sword, that blade whip that he almost took out against Yamato. And that thing that Sasaki tells Franky about him being the most powerful kind of animal that has ever existed really reminded me of a quote from Rob Lucci back in Water 7, where Rob says that based on typing, Zoans are the strongest when it comes to close combat. We cut over to Sanji being chased by Sarahebi, and I think this chapter actually makes Sanji look better than what he did in the previous chapter for a couple of reasons. Not just Luffy's comment about Sanji's observation haki, but in this scene, right? So first thing I notice is that Sanji has freed his legs. If you look at the previous chapter when he was captured, he had both his arms and legs tied up. So he was able to free his legs from that spider web, which by the way makes perfect sense because as we all know, Sanji's strongest point are his legs. Now, another reason for why I think that this chapter makes Sanji look better than what he did in the previous chapter is because I had initially assumed that the spider web that Sanji had been captured in belonged to that creepy big-headed guy with the nasty teeth. I thought that guy was a gifter, and I thought, well, that spider web belongs to that gifter guy. But it turns out that the spider web belongs to Black Maria. And Black Maria is an ancient Zoan type. And so that thread is obviously a lot more powerful, a lot stronger than I initially gave it credit for. I don't think that this is Sanji's fight of the arc. We all know that Sanji doesn't fight women, so I do think that Oda is going to end up moving Sanji to another opponent, preferably Queen. That being said, Oda definitely put Sanji here for a reason for the time being, and so I found it super interesting that spiders are known for having this thing called an exoskeleton. So if you remember, back in Whole Cake Island, we learned that all of the Vinsmoke children developed their exoskeletons from a very young age. An exoskeleton is essentially a skeleton that's on the outside of your body. It's like a suit of armor that ups your durability. So the only one who didn't develop their exoskeleton was Sanji. And so I think this would be a perfect opportunity, when he's up against a spider, to learn about whether or not he can actually develop an exoskeleton like his siblings.
Now, at first I was actually very confused about Black Maria's Devil Fruit power design. We clearly see that she has her own Jolly Roger that kind of also looks like a spider as well. You can see the logo on the legs of the spider. But the reason why I was so confused initially about her design is that typically Zoan Devil Fruit users adapt their human characteristics onto their animal characteristics. So in my mind, because Black Maria is supposed to be a prehistoric spider, because of the rules, the design rules that Oda has established for other Zoans, Black Maria, in my mind, should have looked something like this, where she's combining her body to be kind of like a spider. But in this case, it's like she's growing another head on her lower body. Like she has two mouths, essentially. And so that kind of makes her look more like a gifter than an actual prehistoric Zoan. Not only that, but the face of the spider, right, it looks a lot like one of Big Mom's homies. So it was really strange, but then I did some research about spiders, and it turns out that spiders don't technically have an actual head. Like their head, what we consider to be their head, is actually fused with their thorax. So it's all one big thing. And what I found interesting is that if you notice, the face of the spider only has 6 eyes, and we know that typically spiders have 8 eyes. So if you add the spider's 6 eyes to Black Maria's 2 eyes, that gives you a total of 8. So it's almost as if Oda wants us to combine both faces and think about it as one. Regardless though, the fact that she does appear to have 2 mouths really did get me to think about special types of devil fruits that we've seen before. Like for example, right, we know that Katakuri was a paramecia, but his devil fruit power behaved similar to what we've seen Elogia behave like. So Oda had to clarify that Katakuri was actually a special type of paramecia devil fruit user. The whole thing also got me thinking about Tamago's and Karasu's unclassified devil fruit power. Like even till this day, we don't know exactly what type of devil fruit these two have. Because Tamago, we know that he's an Eggman. Like he has properties of an egg where he has yolk inside of him, and as long as that yolk doesn't get damaged, he can continue to evolve and regenerate. But then he also turns into a chicken, which is an animal. And then Karasu, even though he doesn't turn into a crow himself, literal living crows come out of his body. So it kind of brings up the question of, are these two devil fruits supposed to be Zoans with paramecia properties, or are they supposed to be paramecias with Zoan properties? And also, is Black Maria's devil fruit similar to these special type of devil fruits?
I do think it would be kind of neat if Black Maria's devil fruit turns out to be a special type of ancient Zoan, because then that would mean that Big Mom, Kaido, and Dragon, all of those three have a special devil fruit user in their crews. Like Big Mom has Tamago, Dragon has Karasu, and then Kaido would have Black Maria. And if Robin fights Black Maria, because she spent the 2-year time skip with the Revolutionary Army, maybe Robin can make a comment like, oh, your devil fruit has properties that are similar to Karasu's devil fruit. We're at the 4th floor and Jinbe says something like, oh, Sanji probably sensed a strong opponent back in the 3rd floor, and that's why he's not here, to which Luffy responds, wow, I still have a lot to learn about observation haki. And so of course this relates back to the different branches of observation haki that I touched on when Sanji was able to hear, actual voices from another floor. And so I said that, for example, like Usopp has a different type of like branch of observation haki where he can see through walls that are really far away. Sanji can hear through walls even though he's not close by. And then Luffy, he can see into the future, and he can also sense people's intentions and character. So it turns out Jinbe is at a place called the Cat Cafe. He actually defeats some of the cat people around him and makes an opening for Luffy to go up to the 5th floor. I love how Who's Who, even in his full Zoan form, is smoking a cigar. That's awesome. I like his design a lot. I think it's very menacing. Now, I do think that this was the devil fruit power that most of the fandom was sure about. This was the power that everybody was calling, that everybody expected, and yet the first time Oda dropped a huge hint about this reveal, it completely went over my head.
And so I was so focused on that I didn't notice the most obvious hint of them all, which is that Who's Who's crew has a cat theme to it. And so that probably means that Who's Who's prehistoric Zoan devil fruit power is that of the saber-toothed tiger. It was so obvious, it was right in front of me. I can't believe I missed that.
What's even more intriguing is that Who's Who recognizes Jinbe from when he was a Shichibukai. So this is pre-time skip era, right? Like that's when Jinbe was a Shichibukai. I believe he became a Shichibukai 11 years ago. So, that's quite a bit of a time span that Who's Who could have seen Jinbe. And we also know that Who's Who and Sasaki used to be captains at some point. And so Jinbe has the you-know-what to tell Who's Who, well, take off your mask and maybe I'll recognize you. And Who's Who looks like he's about to pounce. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that out of the 5 Tobi Roppo, right, minus Drake, I'm not counting Drake in this, but I think that out of the 5 Tobi Roppo that are left, I think that Who's Who is the strongest. Like I said, him and Sasaki used to be captains. There's something about his identity that Oda wants to keep a secret. I've said this a lot of times. I think that if you were to remove Who's Who's mask, you would find a third eye there. I think that's what the tattoo on his chest means, and I think that's what the people with the eye symbol on a piece of paper over their face, I think that's what that represents. So I do think that he has the ability of an awakened third eye. He's also a swordsman, and unlike Sasaki, we still don't know what kind of sword he actually has. If Oda's putting him against Jinbe, that probably means that Jinbe is one of 4 Straw Hats that could actually deal with Who's Who, the other 3 being Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy. There's also a quote from Chopper about Carnivore Zoans that I'll get into in a little bit, but ultimately I do think that Oda loves to put carnivores on top. If you look at the CP9 hierarchy, Rob Lucci was at the top, and he was a carnivore Zoan. If you look at the way that Kaido's crew is structured, Kaido is a dragon, and if dragons existed, they would also be carnivores. They would also eat meat. And right below Kaido is King. Pteranodons also were carnivores. And so I do think that Who's Who is probably the strongest out of the 5 Tobi Roppo that are left. And I would imagine that his hybrid form would look like a more menacing version of what Rob Lucci's hybrid form looked like, and that he would wield his sword in this form as well.
The thing I really like about Who's Who's crew, though, is that you can't really tell who's who, pun intended, haha. No, but you really can't tell who's what in this case, because he's got girls in cat costumes, for one. Then he has characters that appear like they could be minks, like the guy with the Spanish hat. That kind of looks like a mink to me. And then he could also possibly have gifters in his crew, and maybe even actual feline Zoan types that are legit Zoans. So it's just this huge, confusing, fun mixture of cat people. Ulti and Page One make it to the outside of the dome. They're still looking for Nami and Usopp. I knew that Ulti wasn't going to let the Nami thing go. She's just way too stubborn a character for that. And we see, unfortunately, that the baboon has been defeated. I mean, he almost looks unrecognizable because of how messed up he got by Ulti and Page One. There's blood everywhere in that small little panel where we see him. Poor baboon. And so it is that by rounding off the chapter with Ulti and Page One in their full Zoan forms, with the exception of Black Maria, this chapter essentially contains all of the Tobi Roppo in their full Zoan forms. And so with that in mind, I do think it's an important time to remember something that Chopper said back in Water 7, which is that Zoan users that are carnivores tend to be more ferocious, more vicious, or more brutal than those who are herbivores, because they have that predatorial nature about them, right? They're predators. They have to hunt. So they become a little bit more brutal. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that somebody like Page One is stronger than Sasaki, because Sasaki has the fruit of a Triceratops, which is a herbivore dinosaur. So I'm definitely not foolish enough to discredit herbivore Zoans because of their fruit. That would be stupid. In fact, 2 out of the 3 Yonko commanders in this arc are herbivores, right? Jack is a mammoth. That's a herbivore. And then Queen is a brachiosaurus, and that's a herbivore too. So it just depends on like how much you train and what you do with the fruit. So in the end, all this statement from Chopper means is that if you were to get 2 Zoan double fruit users and put them against each other in a fight, and the 2 of them happen to be around the same level already, and one had a herbivore fruit and the other one had a carnivore fruit, the one who would be likelier to pull out a win because of the devil fruit type advantage would be the carnivore.
But again, the characters would have to be around the same level for that advantage to mean anything. By the way, just a quick little side note here. I actually read an article recently about Pachycephalosaurus, which is what Ulti is. And it turns out that some researchers discovered that that dinosaur, even though we've always thought it was a herbivore, it turns out that it may have in fact been a meat eater.
We then head over to a storage room with Yamato, Momonosuke, and Shinobu. Shinobu is being placed on a mat so that she can recover. And there's this really big Eastern dragon statue there that's been damaged. And Yamato reveals that it was Ace who damaged that statue. Now that statue to me was a pretty big deal, to be honest, because it almost looks like its cheek got melted by Ace's fire. Like the whole thing looks like it's made out of gold to me. And so I thought about it, I was like, I'm pretty sure I remember seeing a statue like that at some point in the series. And then Yamato said it used to be on the entrance before Ace damaged it. And I was like, oh, this is the same thing the Ryugu Palace had. Back in Fishman Island, there's a giant dragon statue made out of gold on the entrance of the palace. And then I remembered that when Yukimaru was fighting Zoro, he told Zoro that a long time ago, during Ryuma's time, Wano was known as the land of gold, the country of gold, and that pirates and nobles alike wanted to get control of Wano because of its precious gold. That's one of the reasons for why Ryuma became so famous, because he was protecting Wano, he was protecting the land of gold from nobles and pirates that wanted to rule over it. So like Kaido wanting it to become a pirate's paradise, right? But anyway, here's where I'm going with this. Because Wano was known as the country of gold, right? And then that dragon, again, reminds me so much of the same dragon that is back in Fishman Island at the entrance of the palace, of Ryugu Palace, by the way, which, by the way, Ryugu Palace means Dragon Imperial Palace. I think what might have happened is that a long time ago, the people of Wano were friends with the fishmen, and the fishmen actually received that dragon, that gold dragon that is at their palace, as a gift from the ancient families of Wano, or from the people of Wano, maybe as an appreciation gift. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Kind of like France giving the United States the Statue of Liberty. Or maybe one of the members of the 6 ruling families of Wano actually lived in Fishman Island before Wano closed up its borders to the rest of the world. And so maybe it was that guy, that person, who decided to build that palace in Fishman Island for himself or for the fishmen.
So I really like the direction this is going into. It's going into ancient weapon, Void Century territory in a sense, with the Fishman Island / Wano potential connection there. And I also think it's interesting that Fishman Island is right underneath Marajoa, right underneath the headquarters of the world government. So if Wano has a connection to that, it just kind of brings things a lot closer to the end game. So we're obviously going into a Yamato / Ace flashback. You can tell because as Yamato begins speaking about Ace, the margins of the page begin to fade into black. And so flashbacks have black margins. And so next week, the chapter should open up with a flashback. We know that Ace arrived in Wano 4 years ago, and we know that he stayed in Otama's village several weeks. And we also know that he realized that things were messed up in Wano because the people in Tama's village were starving. And so Ace pretended to be caught by them, pretended to get tied up. And then when the people were done eating his food, he burned the ropes and he's like, okay, so you guys are probably in trouble. You're going through a bad time. What's going on? And so I'm guessing that that was the motivation for him to try and go to Onigashima and fight Kaido. Now, of course, we know that Kaido doesn't get defeated and that Ace ends up leaving Wano. Tama wants to go with him and he says, no, you're too young, but I will come back at some point. And when I come back, you'll be able to eat like a normal person, which is the same promise that Luffy makes to Tama in the beginning of this arc. So Ace leaves Wano not being able to defeat Kaido, and then he becomes a Whitebeard pirate. And I guess this brings up the question, once again, why didn't Whitebeard go to Wano to try and fight Kaido, given that he was friends with Oden and Oden was executed by Kaido? Like, how did Whitebeard not know, with Oden being executed and with Ace visiting Wano, that Wano was actually a total mess that needed saving? So I hope we get an answer to that question in this Yamato flashback. And speaking of this being a Yamato flashback, I think it's very fitting structure-wise, because if you remember, Act 3 opened up with Oden's flashback. And so now that it seems like the act is ending, Yamato gets a flashback to close the act. So it starts with Oden and it kind of ends with Yamato, or the new Oden, if you will. It's poetic, it's like poetry. I thought this chapter was the definition of short and sweet. And it wasn't really short, it was just that it had so many double page spreads that it felt short, right? I counted like 5 or 6 double page spreads, so that's what made it feel short. But it was still a very good chapter of One Piece. Let me know your thoughts about the points that I raised. If you like the review, you know what to do. Take care. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.